by the discussion that happened online about this chapter. And I think I want to start with some of the comments that were posted there. But before I start there, I want to start here. In that there's two things I want to talk about in our next, 30 minutes. One is, so the chapter God is Mystery. Why do we sometimes avoid God as mystery? And then secondly, how do we share God as mystery with, well, maybe even people in the community of faith, but I'm thinking especially of people beyond. So those are the two kind of angles that I want to touch on. Why do we avoid God as mystery, and how do we share God as mystery? So let's start with the comment that Nancy made. I copied some of the posts, so I'm just gonna read them if you guys are okay with that. Some excerpts from the discussion. Nancy, you said on page 14, it says, we see that it is not the task of Christianity to provide easy answers to every question, but to make us progressively aware of a mystery. This reminded me of a conversation I had with someone who decided to become Mormon, which I found very interesting, that you made this connection. When I asked why, their answer was because they had an answer for everything, which definitely leaves out any mystery of God. And then I'll read a few of the responses. Alicia said, it is definitely never said that we as Christians need to have every answer all the time. It's a relationship, and there should be mystery in every relationship because that's what keeps it alive. Which I thought, man, yeah, like relationships would be boring if there was no mystery, if there was no further knowing, like this journey of knowing people. And Timothy said, people want to feel secure in their own world. That was a profound insight, Timothy. They want to have a black and white morality where making choices is easy and where there aren't questions to ask. It's easier to have all the questions answered and accounted for than attempt to know a being that has layers and layers, and to learn of a way of living that is much more complex than a list of requirements that leads to rewards. Okay, I think Proverbs and Deuteronomy versus Job, like this is one of the tensions in scripture. In some books, there's this sort of simplistic approach that says, do good and you'll be blessed. Do evil and you'll be cursed. And then there are books that say, but actually it's not that simple, because you're in a relationship with God and he might act outside of that simple system, right? Read the book of Job to get the most dramatic example of that. So then after Timothy, Grace says, Nancy, I can definitely see how people could be drawn to religions like Mormonism that claim to have all the answers. I think it's easy for us to want to know everything rather than having faith in the mystery of God. To me, it seems like people want to elevate their own knowledge sometimes rather than to accept that we can't know everything. Okay, so I'm interested by this discussion about Mormonism and what's going on here? Like, what is it about human beings that we want simple? And is that universal? Is that our culture? Think out loud with me for a minute on that.
I think that it's pretty fair to say that like people like enjoy comfort, and one of the things that is easy to enjoy comfort is in our minds when we like think we have a grasp on something and we understand something, or like in our habits, like our habitual things that we do. So we get this kind of comfort in the things that we do, and then we don't want to get outside of that. And when things come and question that orthodoxy, it shakes us and makes us either frustrated or it makes us grow.
Yeah. And that orthodoxy or our orthopraxy, like our practice. Like you talked about habits, you know, like sometimes it's a belief or a question of what I think, but sometimes it's like actually that thing that you do every day might not be good for you, and maybe you should change. And that's just as sort of destabilizing and uncomfortable, I think, is what I hear.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting that Mormonism came up, because I think that's why religions like Mormonism are so attractive. I read a book once. So my New Testament prof from Denver Seminary was involved, and still is, I think, in a decades-long dialogue with Mormon scholars. And they talked about, you know, it was kind of an interfaith dialogue. Where do we agree? Where do we not? How do we like understand each other better and not be jerks, but still be faithful to our own convictions? And I read a book where he co-authored it with a Mormon, and he made the comment in there that he found it kind of interesting that basically what Joseph Smith did is he took all the theological questions that were burning in the minds of people in the 19th century, and he created a religious system that answered them. Like, he kind of sucked all the mystery out of, or you know, case closed on all these debates that we're having. And a lot of people said, hey, this must be revelation from God, because, you know, this is providing clarity about all these things that Christians are arguing about. I think too about, this is a very different kind of train, but I'm getting at the same point. Think about the self-help genre of literature, or even like leadership books. The 5 foolproof strategies to X, right? The secret. This is what you need to know that will change your life, or, you know, make your leadership work. Or the 7 irrefutable laws of leadership is a famous book by, I think, John Maxwell. Like, let's boil it down. Let's make it simple. Let's package it in a way that people can understand. And if you just do these things, you'll be good. Or if you just understand these doctrines about God, then you've got it. Yeah.
Like a simple, formulaic answer. They want to be able to follow specific steps to reach a desired conclusion.
Yeah.
That's not how the world works.
Yeah, I'm going to talk again, as I have before, about N.T. Wright in a few minutes. And one of my favorite things that he says is, real life just is more complex than that. Because even brilliant scholars who get into all the nitty gritty sometimes come away at the end of it with an oversimplified theory of how things or why things happen. But I would like to suggest that, and you guys hinted at this. Go ahead, Timothy. Yeah, Timothy.
I was just going to say, the reason I use black and white in my comment, this kind of relates to what Matt is saying, is it's something that my sister said to me when I was arguing with her. I don't remember what the argument was entirely about, but I just remember that her objection to what I was saying wasn't any of its content. It was that it's so complex that it must be untrue. And it wasn't black and white. And that really struck me.
Yeah, have you guys ever heard of this phrase, Occam's razor? I don't know much about Occam. I think it was William of Occam or something. Lived, I think, in the Middle Ages, and he made this case that like the simplest explanation is probably the true one. And there's a sense in which, yeah, like if it makes sense of everything. That's one of the ways that a hypothesis is tested, right? Whether it's in history or whether it's in science. If this theory fits with the experiments that we're running, but also has explanatory power to make sense of other stuff, then it's more likely true, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the simplest theory or answer. And I think sometimes we get that confused. Like we think, well, if it's simple, then it must be sensible and it must be true. But sometimes reality is more complex than that. So I want to suggest that church people are just like other people. And we like simple answers. And sometimes we've obscured the mystery. And I think that's why a chapter like Timothy Ware's is so helpful. And even actually, I would commend to you a dabbling in Eastern Orthodox thought. And even Roman Catholic thought is there's sort of a continuum, I think. If the people who are really kind of embracing mystery and walking into the cloud of unknowing are kind of, as far as I've been able to tell, the Eastern Orthodox do that more and better than anybody that I've encountered. But then sort of more in the middle is Catholics, where they're very comfortable with the concept of mystery. I mean, it's essential to the way they understand sacraments and so much about their faith, revelation. But sort of at the other end of the spectrum, I would say are evangelicals in North America. Like we're kind of like those people that want to, draw the box, put some clear boundaries around it, put God inside it, and say, we got this. Like, this is our doctrinal statement. And there's a place for doctrinal statements. I mean, we've had creeds since the beginning of the church. But if we would talk about our tendencies as American evangelicals, we tend to obscure or push sort of the mysterious to the side and be really good at definitions and explanations and clarity, and in the process, I think we just don't leave room for, and you hear stories about people will like, well, let's just, there's like whole organizations and whole approaches to evangelism that have started by drawing something on a napkin. You know, probably all of you have seen that diagram about the two sides of the chasm. You know, there's a cliff on each side, and then you put the cross in the middle. And isn't that just nice and simple? And that doesn't mean it's not true, but oftentimes we kind of reduce things down and say, well, this captures all of it. And we do that with the Bible too. We've been talking about how we read the Bible recently and how we sort of silence blue parakeets. And I think a lot of it is that desire for simplicity. And so if you ask people who tend to think and operate and theologize that way, if they think God is, can fit on a napkin or in a box or in a doctrinal statement, I guarantee you they'd say no. They would say, no, God is way bigger than our finite minds can understand. Like I hear that all the time. But I can't help but notice this tendency that we have, even when we say that, to sort of tame the lion, to use Chronicles of Narnia imagery, or to like our habitual practice isn't always consistent with those humble statements about how impossible it is to know God. And we don't often like How many of you guys have heard we need to enter into the cloud of unknowing? You know, we need to go, if we really want to know God, we have to go up on the mountain with Moses and enter the darkness. What does he call it? The dazzling darkness or something like that? The phrase was amazing. But no, I could be, anyway. So we've already talked a little bit about why we do this, but I want to think about that a little more. Hannah suggested some things. I'd suggest maybe one overarching reason and a couple of ways to unpack that. And essentially, I think it's safer. I think maybe kind of like the leadership books and the self-help aisle at the bookstore, like the church is so busy mimicking our culture that we want to be the same way. Maybe we feel like it's more seeker friendly to present a God who's sort of not approachable, but understandable. Like if people are coming to church because the bottom's dropped out of their life and they're confused and they're hurting and they need help, we need to give them an answer, right? That is somehow simple enough for them to, or if you're witnessing to kids, you can't take them up on the mountain with Moses, maybe. I don't know. So I get that, but here's my problem, is that we start with kids in Sunday school, and then we just tell them the same things for the next 80 years. I am a youth pastor, and I was a high school teacher before that. So for over 10 years, I've been working with high school students, and I teach college, and the kinds of discussions we have, are way beyond the simplistic. I hope you feel that way. But if you read curriculum for high school Bible classes and youth group, I would say at least 90% of it is just Sunday school repackaged. There's no more mystery or nuance or like, let's dive into the tough stuff. We're getting better at it in recent years, honestly. But the majority of it, it's just the same thing we've been saying to them since they were 6, with like cooler graphics. Timothy.
Or it's just God applied that way to modern problems.
Say that again. I couldn't.
Or it's just God simply applied, like in that style, to a modern issue.
Yes. Yeah. So I think maybe we think it's more like it's more attractive to people because the church is in the business of attracting people for some reason. But that's another conversation for next semester. How about this? And this is kind of what Hannah was saying. Simplicity can allow us to be right, and it can allow others to be wrong. We see this being played out in politics right now. All the issues are black and white, and we're right, and they're wrong, right? And so you need to elect our person because they'll fix it. And I was listening to an interview, a resource the other day where I think it was a governor made this comment, like if he was asked the question, what do you want people to understand about what it's like to be the governor? And he said, how terribly complex and difficult it is to do this job. Like from the outside, it looks like, if you listen to the media, well, it's this or that, right? But when you have the cabinet meeting and there's people on different sides of the issue bringing up all these things and you're trying to figure out how to do policies and legislation for a whole society, it quickly gets muddy. And I thought that was a telling statement. And I think that's just another piece of our culture that's like where we're sort of duped into thinking that things are just black and white and simple. And then back to being safe. Maybe a simpler God is less demanding. In the terminology of the chapter, is it safer to believe that God exists than to believe in a God? On page, I think it was 16, he said, to believe in means I turn to you, I rely upon you, I put my full trust in you, and I hope in you. Which is really a really good definition of faith, which is another word that comes from the same biblical root as the word belief. So to faith in someone is really to do those things. And we all know that's not easy or safe. So I think to believe in, yeah, Liz.
I'm just gonna try to put what I'm thinking into words a little bit. But I believe that it might be the reason we are so attracted to simplifying things. I think it could also be attributed to sin, because when we are living in sin, obviously we are carrying a weight on our shoulders, like a very heavy weight on our shoulders. There is no peace. There is no sense of direction. People who live in sin, even if they believe that they're living okay in regards to worldly standards, deep in their souls, they're not in peace. They're not okay. They know that there is something missing. So when you have all of this weight on you, when your mind is not satisfied, your soul is not satisfied, and it's just looking for answers, going after anything that requires more thought, more energy invested in it is added weight onto an already tired soul. So I believe that because of that, we're so attracted to simple, hey, fix your life this way. 7 steps to a peace of mind. Be free of worry in so many days. And that's so attractive because we are so thirsty for direction. Our soul is so thirsty for peace that we want that simplicity like now. But if somebody is like, hey, you need to face what you are carrying in yourself, you need to identify exactly what it is, you need to think through it, you need to figure out the root of the problem. We're like, okay, I'm already overwhelmed, can you just tell me how to get better? And I believe that that's why I relate it to sin, that we're just automatically attracted to just give me the answer now. And even in Christianity, and like you said, instead of helping people value the word of God, the mystery of salvation and just the revelation of God, we're just like, let's adapt it to what people want. Let's make it easy. Let's give our sermons in like a 1, 2, 3 series and let's break it down instead of teaching them, hey, read the Bible thoroughly so that whatever it needs to change in your heart will go to the root of it and not just I have to do this. Okay, I'll fast. I have to pray 3 times a day. I'll pray 3 times a day. Just my opinion.
No, I think that's really insightful. And I think it reminds me of the title of the book that you read from, The Orthodox Way. And his whole point in using that title is to say, the journey of faith is a way. And there may be points along that way where we need to help people sort of simplify. Like the burdened sinner needs to be able to say, I can't do it anymore. I need grace. God loves me, period. And there's points along the way where like things crystallize and like we come up out of the sea of confusion and we kind of see clearly. But I think the danger comes when people get to that point and then the church, we sort of just leave them there instead of then further down the way when they're like, okay, I've had some change of mind, some repentance, and now, okay, we need to keep going, and that means we might need to go back sort of down under for a while and then emerge again, and it's sort of this, it's a journey, and there are moments where clarity comes, and there are moments where we enter the mystery. I mean, Moses didn't spend his whole life in the cloud, right? But he went there. And I think that was transformative for him. So maybe we need both. I don't know. Hannah, you had that comment.
I've been thinking a lot more as you've been talking too, so I have more ideas than what I was going to say. But I was just going to add on to what Liz was saying, like basically the same thing, just in a different way, that life is so complex and there's no way to get around it. Humans are so complex and there's no way to get around it. So that's why we strive for simplicity, because we get tired of the complexity. But that's, when you are internalizing your complexity and you're not giving it over to God and being marveled by his complexity, you're stuck in this self-perpetuating tunnel of depression that just leaves you lost in sin. And that can even happen for people who are saved, just because they don't have that communication, that relationship with God.
Yeah, it's a good point. Thanks. Timothy, were you gonna say something?
I was going to say that it's easier to tell someone that you're going to do this, this, and this, and everything's going to be fine than to tell them, well, hey, guess what? I don't have any of the answers you're asking. I only have like this one, and this is going to be an ongoing journey for the rest of your life. In about 5 years, you're probably going to have an existential crisis, and you're going to be wondering about this and that, and life is still going to suck, but it'll be good at the end.
Yeah.
People don't really want to hear that.
Yeah, and I think there's, like I say, there's definitely a time and place, and this is good feedback that you guys are giving me, because I've sort of, you've heard my critical sort of edge. But there's a time and a place to help people kind of boil it down, and I think God's Spirit does that. Like he takes us to a point of clarity, but when we then go on and keep things manageable, or try to make a God manageable that's not, then I think we do people a disservice in the end. Yep. Matthew.
One thing I had on that was when Tim started talking about how people want that, don't want to just be told that it'll take a while, but it made me think it's partially of how we're raised. We've been raised, this generation especially. We want instant gratification, want now, and we're not prepared as others were in the past to be prepared to just go on a journey to find it. We just want it quick, like everything else is.
Yeah, it's a really good point. So that was really only the first question. The second one, maybe we can pick up on it on Thursday. But given this reality, how do we share the mystery of God? And even what you guys have just brought up, like some people are in the thick of confusion, and for them, maybe we need to help them, and God's Spirit needs to help them uh, gain clarity. But I think there's also people, maybe those who are not so much in like an existential crisis, but those who are a little more like hardened skeptics. And it's more like a me against God or me against the church kind of mentality, where we're more like the polarized political debate where, no, this isn't really that complex. I'm right, Christians are wrong, you know? And I think to kind of hint at where I'm going, one of the things we need to do is learn how to open up a story and kind of do what Ware does is and say, I don't have like a logical proof like geometry to give you, but I have a pointer toward a different way of understanding reality. And why don't you see if it makes sense to you? And so that doesn't necessarily it doesn't always boil everything down to just here's my 4 spiritual laws, but it says all those those could be part of the picture, but it says here's a different way, given the human condition. Here's a different way of construing reality in the story that we find ourselves in. Maybe it makes better sense of the confusion that we find ourselves in. So, Nancy, you had a comment. We're out of time, so if people need to jet or sign off, feel free. But Nancy, if you still wanted to share, I'm happy.
I guess. So I was just going to answer how I dealt with the Mormon that I was talking to.
Oh, yeah.
So when he had told me why, I asked him for examples of what those truths were, and then I asked him, does he know what faith is? And he said like out of the Bible, and I go, yeah. And he says the things, he quoted it, and then I was like, okay, well, is that really faith in God if you know everything about him? Like, there's something we have to look forward to that you are not gonna know. You're gonna have to wait for it and expect it, and it really, I guess, challenged him, and everything he was trying to bring across to me of what they had told him. I would answer him with questions regarding the Bible and what he thought of it, and he didn't have the answers, and I go, oh, they haven't taught you those things yet. Okay. He goes, which is, and I was surprised too, and he was just like, he would just keep asking me. He would just randomly text me questions and stuff, but I haven't spoke to him since. But I have spoke to many Mormons after that, and they stopped talking to me after they asked me if I'm in need of anything, and then I'll say no, God has supplied all my needs. And so since they couldn't give me anything, they were like, oh, okay, like, she's good, we can't do anything for her. Yeah. And they would leave. So
and their church isn't able to answer some of the questions you raised, is what you said.
Yeah.
Which I think is so telling, because Mormonism does. They have a pretty neat, clean system, and when you start asking questions, that's not something they encourage.
Yeah.
Contrast with Christianity, where this hasn't always been the case, but in the best versions of Christianity, bring on the questions.
Yeah.
God can take them and they've all been asked before, and there are good answers out there. Again, not like foolproof kinds of logical demonstrations that where like you can do it like a math problem, like he says in the book, but ways of explaining it, and so I think we ought to be confident in that and welcome that, whereas like the Mormon faith tends to say, don't go there, and I think that's actually that's a characteristic of a lot of religions, that they don't, like more fundamentalist kinds of religions, like they don't want their people asking questions because
It's just like how the Roman Catholic Church didn't want the Englishmen getting the English versions of the Bibles and handing them out to people, because they knew that there were translations that they used that were not, whether
Yeah.
they changed one of them to it was supposed to say repentance, and they changed it to of penance.
Yeah. Yep.
Like,
Yeah. What happens when everybody starts reading this for themselves?
Right.